The story will be told from the perspective of the main female character.
I was still wearing my work clothes when my father told me that my leg was not worth $12,000. I stood in a clean hospital hallway in Boston. My scrubs still had blood stains on them. I was a second-year surgical resident. That meant I worked 80 hours every week for a small paycheck that barely paid for my student loans and my expensive rent. My medical degree was a promise for a future, but my bank account was empty. The doctor had just told me that disability was a fact if I did not have surgery right away. I pressed the phone to my ear. My knee was so swollen that the fabric of my pants was very tight. On the other end of the line, my father sighed. He told me they just bought a vintage Jaguar E-Type. My mother made a long, tired sound while my sister laughed. My sister called this my lesson in being careless. I did not cry. I did not beg. I just became very quiet and cold. Have you ever been told your health was less important than a status symbol? I did not wait for an answer. I did not argue with my father about the price of a vintage Jaguar versus my ability to do my job as a surgeon. I just pushed the red icon on my screen and ended the call. The quiet sound of the hospital hall came back. I sat on a hard metal bench. My scrubs were still damp with sweat and the blood of a stranger. I took a deep breath. My anger was not loud. It was clinical. I rubbed my eyes to focus. This was not a breakdown. This was a balance sheet, and I was deep in the red. I opened my laptop right there in the hallway. My hands were steady even though my knee was hurting very badly. I was not looking for sympathy. I was looking for money. I started clicking through every bad lender and fast cash service I knew about. I did not care about high interest rates or the hard rules for paying it back. I only cared about the $12,000 I needed to keep my spot in the operating room. I gave up my future money to save my hands and my career right now. Every digital signature was a promise to myself to never be in this position again. I saw then that I had been the silent partner in their version of a family for 28 years. And today, my reward was a no that sounded like a final notice. A shadow fell across my screen and I looked up. My brother was standing there. He smelled like industrial oil and old exhaust. His face was dirty from a double shift at the mechanic shop. His eyes looked very tired. He did not ask what our father said. He did not have to. He reached into the pocket of his dirty jacket and pulled out a thick envelope. He put it in my hand. It was $2,500 in old bills. It was the exact amount he got for selling his professional welding tools. Those tools were his only way to make a living. I looked at the money, then at him. "You sold them," I whispered. He just gave me a small, tired nod. "I need you walking, Wendy," he said. "I will figure out the metal later." In that moment, the chains I had worn my whole life broke. I had spent 28 years in a toxic house. I was in a prison where you learn to be quiet just to keep the peace. I thought my silence was my strength. But looking at my brother's scarred hands, I realized my silence was just a cage. I was done being the victim of my parents' cruelty. My brother was not just giving me $2,500. He was giving me proof. He showed me that family is a choice. He chose me when I was hurt, while our parents chose a car. I took the money because I needed to remember his sacrifice. I needed to remember who showed up when things were bad. This was not a family drama anymore. It was accounting, and I was about to audit every single one of them. As I lay in that narrow hospital bed, waiting for the surgical team to take me under the bright lights, my knee was not the only thing that hurt. My mind went back to the dinner table from my childhood. That was a place where you only got a good seat if you were a good investment. I was always sitting at the extra table. I watched the tiles on the ceiling go by as I was moved. Each tile felt like a scene from a movie of every time. My parents told me my needs did not matter as much as someone else's show. I remembered when my sister was 22 and decided to start her health and wellness business. She spent $35,000 of my parents' money in only 4 months. There were no contracts to sign, no interest rates, and nobody gave her a lecture about how serious it was. My mother said she was just finding her light. My father just patted her on the head and wrote another check. He acted like her going broke was just a normal cost of doing business. They saw my sister as a valuable asset that they had to protect. They wanted to build her brand even if she had no idea what she was doing. Then there was my story. When I was 23, the transmission in my car died during a very cold winter. I needed $2,200 so I could get to my hospital rotations. It was the only way I could finish my degree. I did not ask for a gift. I asked for a loan. I still remember the cold look in my father's eyes when he pulled a 3-page paper out of his printer. It was a legal loan agreement. It had 5% interest that added up every month. My mother stood over me. Her hand was on my shoulder, but she was not comforting me. She was there to make sure I signed. "It builds character, Wendy," she whispered. Her voice was as smooth as glass. "You will thank us later." For 6 months, I lived on canned beans. I walked 4 miles to the grocery store in the snow just so I could make those payments on time. I paid them back 3 months early because I hoped they would say, "Well done." I wanted a seat back at the main family table. Instead, my father gave me a bill for the notary fee he paid to have the contract signed. I realize now that I was trapped by their cruelty. My parents called their neglect a lesson. They called my sister's failure potential. They made a story where my suffering was just part of who I was. They called me the tough one so they could feel better about giving everything to the child who made them look good. I was not their daughter. I was a quiet investor in their fake version of a perfect family. They used my kindness for years. They used my strength to pay for my sister's mistakes. But as the doctor came toward me with the mask, I felt very cold and clear. This was not a breakdown. This was a balance sheet. I was not just there to fix my leg. I was there to close an account that had been open for too long. My father and mother had spent 28 years teaching me how to be cold and how to value a contract over a person. It was time for me to show them how well I learned their lessons. I woke up to the smell of cleaners and the heavy weight of a metal brace on my leg. The surgery was a success, but I did not get any help from my family while I recovered. While I was learning to walk again, one painful step at a time, my phone was empty. There were no cards and no calls from my mother to ask about my pain. My father did not even send a text to see if the surgery he refused to pay for had worked. Eventually, the bandages were gone and I got a professional brace. Around that time, my workers' comp settlement arrived. I got the money because I was hurt while saving a patient during a big emergency. The payout was $500,000. To the insurance company, that money was just a small error. To me, it was the money I needed to destroy my father's business. For the first time, I had a lot of cash. I sat in my quiet apartment with the check on the table. I realized my parents' silence was a market signal. I was not a problem they had to manage anymore. I was nothing in their world of luxury brands. The silence finally broke on a Tuesday evening, but it was not the phone call I deserved. It was my mother. Her voice was high-pitched and she sounded very stressed. She did not ask how my knee was or if I could walk without my crutches. Instead, she started lecturing me about being selfish for missing the party for the vintage Jaguar E-Type. "Your father has worked so hard for this, Wendy," she snapped. "The local car club will be there. We told everyone you would be here to help serve. Your absence makes us look fragmented. It is negligent." I looked down at the scars on my knee. They were still red and ugly. I thought about the huge debt I knew they were hiding behind that car's leather seats. My sister joined the call on the other line. Her voice sounded fake and sweet. "Come on, Wendy. Just wear a long dress. No one will even notice the brace. Stop being so dramatic and do something for the family for once," she said. The nerve they had was amazing. They wanted me to be a prop in their fake life just to make them look successful. "I won't be there," I said. My voice was calm and firm. I did not give them an explanation. I did not give them a medical excuse. I did not let them see my anger. I just hung up the phone and watched the screen turn black. My anger was not loud this time. It was an investment strategy. I realized that my parents had used up all my kindness for 28 years, and I was finally closing that account. I did not look at my rehab schedule. I picked up the phone and called a high-end financial lawyer in downtown Boston. He was very expensive and had a big reputation. When he answered, I did not sound like a hurt daughter. I sounded like a boss. "I want to initiate an audit," I told him. "I want to know every cent my parents owe, every lien on their property, and exactly how much it will cost to buy their entire world out from under them." This was not for revenge. This was for accounting. A few days later, I was in his office. It was made of glass and steel. He did not offer me any tea or say nice things about family. Instead, he pushed a thick folder across his big desk. "This is the story your parents tell themselves," he said. I opened the folder and watched their success fall apart in seconds. The house I grew up in, which my mother called her nest egg, was fully leveraged. They had refinanced it many times and were 3 months behind on payments. The vintage Jaguar my father used as an excuse to ignore my injury was bought with a loan based on money he did not even have. My sister's business was losing cash every day. They were paying her workers by taking money out of the house, which was already worth less than the debt. They were not rich. They were just very good at pretending. My father did not refuse to pay for my surgery because he loved a car more than me. He refused because he was a financial arsonist trying to keep the fire away from his curtains. I looked at the numbers until my eyes hurt. They refused to give me $12,000 to save my career, while they threw away hundreds of thousands to look good for a car club. "Can we protect you from this?" my lawyer asked. "Shield your assets so you're not exposed when it collapses." I closed the folder. "No," I said. "I don't want to run from their debt. I want to own it." That was the moment the plan became real. We moved fast and quiet. I started a shell company with no names or family links. It was just a clean business entity. My lawyer talked to the banks that held my parents' bad debt. Banks do not like loans that are not being paid. They like cash. They will trade a bad loan for real money very quickly. With my $500,000, I went after their late mortgage and the Jaguar loan. I did not buy the house. I bought the right to take it from them. I became my parents' main creditor. They did not even know my name was on the debt. I did not do it because I was greedy. I did it for clarity. Within 48 hours, I went from the daughter they ignored to the shadow landlord who owned their house, their car, and their stability. They had no idea. That was the coldest part of my plan. I sat in my apartment and realized that if I told them the truth, they would never sign the papers I needed. So I did not go to them as Wendy. I went as opportunity. A middleman reached out for my company. He offered them a deal to sell the house and lease it back. It meant they got immediate help and no public shame. He even offered a small line of credit for my sister's failing business. They signed every single page of the 50-page contract without reading the small print. They thought the rules did not apply to people who looked as successful as they did. When the pen hit the paper, I felt a weight leave my chest. I was not just walking again. I was standing on their foundation. The air in the lawyer's office was thick with the smell of paper and bad news. I sat perfectly still as he opened a second, thinner folder. I thought I had seen the worst of it, the debt, the lies, and the fake lifestyle. But as the lawyer showed me a trust fund document, I realized I had only seen the surface of what they did. My father had not just spent money he did not have. He had destroyed the future of the only person who actually loved me. My grandfather had left $45,000 in a special trust for Caleb. It was meant to be the money for Caleb to open his own mechanic shop after years of hard work. But the account was empty. I looked at the withdrawal paper, my eyes fixed on the signature at the bottom. It was Caleb's name, but the writing was too smooth. It was not my brother's shaky, grease-stained handwriting. It was my father's elegant, clinical script. Robert had forged his own son's signature to pay for his delusions. He had stolen $45,000 from a 26-year-old man who worked 60 hours a week just to keep my father's house from being taken by the bank. I thought about Caleb's scarred hands. He had sold his only tools to save my leg, while our father was driving Caleb's stolen dreams in a vintage Jaguar. This was not just a family fight anymore. This was a felony. In that moment, I felt the weight of being the one who watches. I had spent years watching Caleb get worn down. I had felt a quiet guilt that I could not do more to help him. But now, I realized I had seen a crime I did not even know was happening. My father treated Caleb like a resource to be used, and my mother just stood by and watched the light go out in her son's eyes. I stared at the fake signature. My anger was not loud. It was a strategy. My father's name on that paper was more than a confession. It was the final payout on a life of neglect. I had been the silent partner in their version of a family, and I was finally calling in the debt. This was not a breakdown. It was a balance sheet, and Robert was about to find out exactly what happens when you use up a daughter's mercy. I did not ask for a legal opinion. I looked at my lawyer and gave him the only order that mattered. "I want the criminal evidence ready," I said. "I'm not just his landlord anymore. I'm the one who holds the warrant." This was the final shot. I was no longer the daughter sitting at the extra table. I was the person in charge of their destruction, and the audit was just beginning. They arrived 20 minutes late. They complained about the downtown traffic like their time was the only thing that mattered. My father fixed his tie and looked around the expensive office like he belonged there. My sister checked her face in the glass. She did not know the floor under her was not hers anymore. My mother let out a practiced, tired sigh. She asked the receptionist when the senior partner would finally see them to talk about their small money issue. I was already sitting there. My back was toward them in a high leather chair. I listened as they talked about me like I was an absent ghost. They called me a tough daughter who would eventually fix her own mess while they saved the family's image. When the lawyer finally nodded at me, I turned my chair to face them. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. My sister's fake smile did not just fade. It disappeared. My mother's face turned white. Her hand went to her throat like she was trying to breathe. My father just stared. His mouth opened and closed as he tried to find a world where his discarded daughter was sitting in the seat of power. "Hello, Robert, Susan," I said evenly. I did not call them Mom or Dad. I had ended our relationship weeks ago. Now it was just a business deal. I realized then that their love had been a subscription service, and I had finally stopped paying for it. "Wendy, what is this?" my father managed to say. I did not answer him directly. Instead, I put 2 papers on the table. The first was the legal loan agreement from when I was 23. It was the one where they charged me interest to fix a car so I could work. The second was the evidence of the forgery. It showed the papers where Robert had stolen $45,000 from Caleb's trust. "You think your status is a right, but it's just a lie," I said. My voice was calm and lethal. "This is the illusion of an empty wallet." Their entire life was a show. It was a luxury brand built on stolen dreams and debt. They were not powerful. They were just tenants in a house of cards I now owned. Robert jumped forward. His face turned a dark, scared red. He started talking fast about family and misunderstandings. I did not stop him. I listened the way I was trained to do during hospital meetings. I watched him reveal his own desperation. I stood up. My leg held my weight perfectly. It was the leg they refused to pay for. I leaned across the table and looked my father directly in the eye. "You don't owe me $12,000 for a surgery, Robert," I said. "You owe Caleb a future, and I am here to collect every cent." I handed my lawyer the signed eviction notice. I was no longer the silent partner in their lies. I was the person in charge of their reality, and the audit was over. The fallout was not a loud explosion. It was the quiet sound of things being sold. The house I grew up in was sold within 30 days to get back the money I now controlled. I did not keep the profit for myself. I did not need to fund my life with their wreckage. Instead, I used the money to get a great commercial lease and a full set of high-end equipment. I walked into a new mechanic shop on the edge of Boston. It was filled with the smell of new tires and real hope. I handed the deed to Caleb. For the first time in 26 years, he did not look tired. He looked like a man who finally owned the ground he stood on. My father, my mother, and my sister moved into a small 2-bedroom rental. The carpet was dirty and they had no status there. Robert spent his days answering letters from the district attorney about the $45,000 he had stolen from his own son. There were no more vintage cars, no more fancy dinners, and no more acting like they were successful. They found out that a family built on money eventually goes bankrupt. I went back to the operating room 6 months after the surgery they refused to pay for. As I washed my hands, the water was cold and the silence was total. I looked at my hands. These were the hands my father decided were not worth $12,000. They were better than they had ever been. I realized then that letting go of a family is not a betrayal. It is a surgical necessity. It is cutting off a bad part to save the rest of the body. I have learned that family is not the name on your birth certificate. It is the person who sells their livelihood so you can walk again. It is the loyalty that shows up when there is blood on the floor. I opened my phone one last time. I found their names and hit delete. I did not feel angry, and I did not feel like I had won. I just felt the solid weight of my own 2 feet on the ground.